Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to basically debunk the whole idea of functional strength. And this is something that has been really popular in recent years, and there's a couple of problems with the whole idea. Number one, it sort of implies that there's such a thing as non functional strength, which, again, anyone who understands human performance would scoff at the idea because all strength is essentially functional. All strength is functional. So it implies that there is actually something as non functional strength. And the other issue is that a lot of the methods that are used as functional strength training aren't particularly good at developing strength. Um, and even though I'm going to talk to you guys about just doing basic classic lifts, because building a strength base is what we would be talking about if someone even wanted the things that these sort of training promises. But I don't even really fully train that way myself as a strength athlete. Yes, I do the classic lifts and variations of them to 1 rep maxes, but the bulk of my training is just geared around hypertrophy towards the primary movers and particularly the weak points in all my lifts, right? So it's really in a lot of ways what a lot of the functional strength people would scoff at. They're like, oh, you're going to do a bunch of bodybuilding type training to put another 100 pounds on your deadlift. It's like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So it's not even necessarily what I do when I recommend these things. But let's be realistic here. What is strength? What is strength? How do we define strength? It's the production of force against an external object. Now, the whole idea behind a lot of this functional strength training, as they call it, is that it's to teach you how to balance and stabilize and handle awkward loads and do these things. But doesn't normal strength training already train you to do that? Right? I mean, balancing on something isn't going to make you stronger. Just picking up an awkward light object in one hand and flinging it around, that's not going to necessarily make you stronger. And that's the problem with their logic. In other words, if you were to take some novice lifters and put them on a basic barbell strength program for a year and have them focus on squats or squat variations with a barbell, deadlifts, overhead pressing, rows, bench presses, maybe some body weight stuff, some dips, chin ups, whatever. And they get pretty strong at that. And let's say you take that group of men and you get their average squat up to 275, their average deadlift up to 350 or 375. Not particularly strong, right? That's not objectively speaking particularly strong. I wouldn't consider it strong. But you compare that to someone who does a bunch of this functional training. They do a bunch of kettlebells. And don't get me wrong, I think kettlebells are great for certain forms of conditioning and stuff in GPP. Like they have their place. I own kettlebells. I don't use them a lot these days, but I own them and will admit they have their uses. That's the thing. You have to be open-minded about the use of these tools. I mean, most of these tools do have some uses if you think about it, and you're willing to implement them in the correct ways. But you compare that to people who are doing kettlebell squats and things like that, and you compare their ability to stabilize awkward loads with the people who've been doing heavy barbell squats and deadlifts and overhead presses, like with a big heavy barbell, and get to those other numbers, who's going to be better able to handle awkward loads? Right? Who's going to do that? The guys who've gotten generally stronger. Because that's what people forget. They get so caught up in the specific aspects of strength that, well, if I just use a light awkward load, that's going to make me strong when handling an awkward load. But you know what? Putting a 250-pound barbell up on your shoulders and squatting it, well, that really wouldn't be a real weight for me. But for most people, if you can do that, doesn't that train you to handle an awkward load also? Because you're already used to handling 250 pounds up on your back and having to stabilize it for reps and use your core and your hips and everything else to stabilize that load and keep it upright while squatting it. You've already trained yourself to handle lighter loads. Like 100-pound awkward load's not going to be a problem for you, is it? Right? Same thing if you've trained to overhead press and you can, pick up a barbell and you can rep 120 pounds 5 times over your head, you're not going to have a problem with an awkward kettlebell of 50 pounds. So the problem you have is that a lot of this functional strength training doesn't build actual strength. And the actual act of maximizing strength itself is functional, right? So if you talk about the ability to pick up an awkward load or something in the real world, which is what they focus on, general strength training does a pretty dang good job of that already. You know, what makes you more prepared for field sports or a contact sport? And I'm not saying there isn't some specialized training we can do for those people. I mean, I have a couple of clients who do BJJ. I mean, we do think about some things in their weight training. And I'm not saying they're serious competitors. I'm not saying that they're competing at some high level, but they do it. And so we do incorporate some things in their training to facilitate that, right? Some extra grip work, some extra stuff for certain angles and isometrics and speed work against bands and things like that, right? We incorporate some of that, but we still do their basic training also. Because you know why? You know what prepares you really well for contact sports? Being able to push a really heavy weight up over your head, being able to stabilize a really heavy weight up on your back and squat it, being able to pick up a heavy barbell off the ground, that actually prepares you really, really, really well for contact sports compared to someone who's never done it. Compared to someone who's never done it, because simply put, you're able to generate more force. You're stronger. And a person who's stronger is still going to be stronger at the awkward loads versus a person who's weaker, who's practiced a little more with awkward loads. And let's again come back to the point. Stabilizing a really heavy barbell on your back and squatting it is kind of an awkward load, right? You have to learn how to do that, and you have to build your stabilizers to do that. So this whole idea that these people want to create this whole specialized style of training that actually just produces less strength, and I'm not saying it's useless, because resistance is resistance, but realistically speaking, it's going to produce less strength. And when it comes to being able to function and produce force at different angles, a generally strong person is going to produce more force than a weaker person, irrespective of the specificity involved. You know, the only exception being really high skill things, right? When we're talking about really high skilled movements, such as correctly throwing a baseball at the professional level, or a boxer throwing a perfect punch, or a martial artist throwing a perfect kick that they have practiced 10,000 times with perfect technique, okay, that would be the exception, because those are highly technical movements. But here's what I can tell you: someone else who is twice as strong all the way around the board, who's also had that same amount of practice at those highly proficient movements, is still going to produce more force at them. They're still going to have more force behind that ball. They're going to have more force behind that kick, if they, of course, have the technical proficiency and practice to go with it. But generally speaking, someone who is just all around stronger is going to produce more force. And that's going to include being able to stabilize themselves against awkward loads. So what this ends up being is just a big, goofy circle jerk that produces less actual strength than just normal, traditional strength training. And then we come down to the most ironic part, is that a lot of the training that they do eschew and make fun of, such as, oh, just some extra hypertrophy work, and which would oftentimes be classified as bodybuilding training, is that for people who are already proficient and used to lifting big heavy weights, actually just spending time hypertrophying all their weak links on those movements will sometimes add 100 or 200 pounds to their squat or their deadlift. And then they're really capable of producing force, and they're a hell of a lot more functional. So ultimately, what this tells us is that there is no such thing as functional versus non-functional strength. There's only strength, right? There's only strong and stronger. You're either able to produce force or you aren't. And the whole idea is really ludicrous, and it's the idea is sound. I love the idea of saying, "Oh yeah, we need to be able to have strength that transfers over to the real world." But any person who is really strong has that ability. We don't necessarily need a more specialized, less efficient form of training to do it. All right, guys. Well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.